Where'd my marker go? There it is. All right. I hope you all had at least mildly a little tiny bit relaxing spring break, that you were able to recharge maybe a little bit and are feeling a little bit less burned out. Um, so yay. Welcome back. We're halfway done. Yay. All right. So what we're going to do today is kind of continue what we talked about the last class before break. The last class before break was on heuristics and basically mental shortcuts we often take. And what we were basically talking about was ways in which those ways of thinking, those psychological facts about us, can lead to our reasoning poorly. And so basically what it was kind of a lesson in when you're thinking and trying to get to the truth or getting the right answer, make sure that you don't be led astray by these sorts of internal thinking principles and these sorts of bad ways of coming to conclusions. Know your statistics, know your small sample size, know that sort of stuff. This time, we're going to be talking about a similar way in which you can be led astray. So instead of, so we talked about all the good reasoning, then we had the fallacies of reasoning, then we had these thinking principles. Now we're going to have social psychology principles that can lead to you doing things that, or reaching conclusions you wouldn't necessarily want to reach, doing things you wouldn't necessarily want to do. So we'll be talking about social psychology. Has anyone taken a psychology class or independently know what is meant by social psychologies? No worry, Ref. Anyone know what's meant by social psychology? All right, well, first off, what's psychology? What do psychologists study?
Isn't it how people think?
Yeah, it's a study of the mind or how people think or human behavior. So, what is social psychology? Well, what is something that's what does it mean for something to be social? Yeah, and psychology also looks at personalities and the ways they affect our behavior. What is something social, or what is it to be social?
To interact with other people.
Yeah, so it's to interact with other people. So, and this is literally in the straightforward sense of like your one friend is much more social than your other. It just means they like to go out and interact with people. So what social psychology studies is the ways in which the people around us and the situations we're in, specifically the sorts of people in those situations, cause us to think and behave. Because we often, and critical thinking really in a lot of ways assumes that thinking happens like alone by yourself in a room. You think really hard, and the only things that determine what you're going to conclude is what you're thinking in that moment in your own head. And what social psychology looks at is the ways in which your thinking, the conclusions you reach, are not just determined internally by the things in your head, but rather your behaviors are very much influenced by the social situation you find yourself in, the other people around you. And what's been found by social psychologists who have been working in laboratory settings and observational settings for the past, 75 years, is there's a whole lot of basic principles that human beings tend to follow and ways we tend to be affected by others. So it's good to know about these effects, in part because other people know about these effects and will use them against you. And so what your homework assignment is for this week is due next Monday, or I guess due Saturday, that I'll talk about next Monday, is basically I'm asking you all to look at some advertisements out there in the world, and those advertisements employ social psychological principles to try to convince you to buy something and make you more inclined to get something that you wouldn't necessarily need. So what we're just going to be talking about today are 5 big social psychological principles, why they exist in the human mind and what they are and how they influence behavior, and know how to look for them and how to avoid being influenced by them. So the first one I want to talk about is the halo effect. Does anyone know what the halo effect is? Has anyone heard of this before? If not, I'm not expecting you to, but
Isn't it when like something that is like clearly bad, but it has like a halo effect, which makes it look good, versus yeah, kind of erase that bad.
you're along the right idea. It's a case in which something bad is made to look good, or something that you don't want is made to look good. And the way it's made to look good, however, is by having it associated with another good thing. So instead of just giving someone a bad thing, you instead give them a good thing to teach them about the bad thing. So a classic case of this is people in beer commercials. Just, I think I may have brought this up earlier. What do people in beer commercials look like?
They're having a good time.
Fit and happy.
Yeah, they're beautiful and they're happy. Why? Well, the idea is that you see someone happy or something good, and it causes you to associate whatever other thing with that good thing. Michael, your microphone just turned off. All right, I'm gonna push. Can people hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I just wanted to make sure that microphones on weren't interfering. All right, so the halo effect is basically the classic case of this is if you want to get something passed, have it or want something sold, use someone beautiful to sell it. Why? Because it's a social psychological effect that we are just generally inclined to like pretty people or happy people or positive things more than we like sad, negative, ugly things. It's why is this the case? Well, it just seems like when you're in a good mood, you're more likely to see the bright side of things. If you're an optimist, you see the positivity. If you are in a good mood, you're likely to see something happy. And when you're happy, you're very often more inclined to deem something likable or something nice. So this is very often why people will try to they don't try to engage you and try to get you to sign their petition on your way to work in the morning. Rather, they wait till you're leaving in the evening because they assume you're going to be in a better mood. Can anyone think of other cases with the halo effect? Cases in which you are manipulated or someone tries to get you to do something, and part of the way they do it is by using beautiful people to try to get you to purchase this thing, or nice, happy people, or positive experiences.
Would an example be like, let's just say like a Peloton?
Mm-hmm.
How they, in their commercials or ads, they have like really active people living this lifestyle, and this is.
Yeah, that's a really good one. It's happy people. They're always fit as hell that look like they're having a good time, and it's to try to get you to be like, oh yeah, this looks fun. That feels good. Dale, did you have one? Oh, Valerie says cigarette commercials. That's another classic case. It's always really happy or cool people. You're like, yeah, that person's cool. I want to be in a good mood. Anything that has puppies in it, like any advertisement where it's like, come and check out my new yada yada and look at this cute puppy. Well, the puppy is supposed to make you feel better, feel happier. So this is the halo effect. It's basically just, there's cases of this with actual politicians, is generally like people are more likely to succeed, and it's not always the case, but people are more likely to succeed by being attractive. I think it's like clearest in like high school, like student council things. Or why is it that the popular kids are always the good-looking kids in high school? Well, it seems like the popular kids, because they look nice, people assume that they must be good people. It's also why in movies, they very often try to make the villain unattractive because it's supposed to like capture their darkness of their personality. All of these are cases relying on the halo effect. This one's pretty straightforward, and anytime you see somebody just, somebody who doesn't know anything about a topic but is very attractive trying to sell it, that's a case in which somebody's trying to utilize the halo effect. Anytime someone compliments you before asking for something, that's the halo effect. They try to put you in a good mood so you can then buy it. Anything like that. All right, so that's the first one, halo effect. Let's go with, let's see, which one do I want to do next? These two are kind of related, but in-group preference and in parentheses, out-group dislike. Does anyone know what this means? First off, what is meant by an in-group versus an out-group? Have people heard these phrases before, in-group and out-group? Basically, the way you can think of them is just an in-group is the group of people that you are a member of from your perspective. An out-group is people who are different than you, so not an out-group. So relative to from our perspective here, assuming all of you live in the United States, people living in the United States, that is one of our in-groups. Out-groups would be people who don't live in the United States. Also, in-group, New Yorkers. Out-groups, other people. So out-group would include people from Philadelphia, people from Alaska, people from Paris. All that are out-groups. If you are a fan of a particular sports team, your in-group are other fans of that sports team. If you're of a particular gender, your in-group are other people of that gender. Out-groups are people not of that gender. All right, so that's what in-group and out-group are. So what is an in-group preference and out-group dislike? Anyone guess what I mean by this? Or what
You
is
like people most similar to you, maybe?
That's exactly it. It's generally what's been found is that people who are identified as members of the same group as you, or people you identify as members of your group, you generally show a certain level of preference towards them. To be clear, it's not that this can't be outweighed, but generally speaking, if you find out that somebody shares a characteristic with you, your initial inclination is to prefer that person and to have a positive sort of feeling towards them. So to give some examples, well, can anyone think of these things in practice or ways in which in-group preference gets exploited? Whenever you go and buy something from a store in which there's Juan, did you want to, was that Juan talk? Yeah, Juan.
Yes, I would say maybe when you're a classroom and you're like non-native speaker and you try to find whoever speaks your language, that can be an example.
That's a great case. Very often, if you're in a new place where you don't know anyone, you try to find someone else who shares any characteristic that you can share. So if you come into a classroom for a first time, you find out where else everyone is from, and you find out somebody else is from this like 2 blocks away from you, you gravitate towards that person just because you have a shared background. They are from the same neighborhood as you. You feel positively towards them. Or you find out that they speak the same language as you, and it's not the main language being spoken here. If you speak Spanish and there's somebody else in the classroom speaking Spanish, that's something in common. Initially, you're going to feel slightly more positive feelings towards them. Also, if you're a fan of a sports team and you meet someone for the first time and you find out they like the same sports team as you start to feel positively towards this person. And then on the flip side, what do you do when you find out they like a different sports team than you? What are your feelings about them?
You basically feel negative towards them. You're like, you're my competitor in a sense.
Exactly. You have a negative feeling initially. This isn't to say they couldn't become your friend, but initially your feelings are, well, you're not a member of my group, therefore you're out there. You are somebody on the outside of my group. My group, we are the goods. You out group, you are the bads. I'm good, you're bad. If you're like me, you must also be good. So that's the idea behind in-group preference and out-group dislike. So how might this general psychological principle be used in practice? How might somebody exploit the in-group preference, out-group dislike sort of psychological tendencies when trying to sell you something or when trying to get you to believe something?
I guess like an example I kind of like, I think a bit appropriate. It's like, let's just say you're applying for a job, and if you, let's just say one person knew someone that went to the school, has all these things in common versus someone that's out of the blue, with all that.
That's a great case. One of the best ways to make yourself like known is you find out that the person, if you are interviewing someone for a job, you find out they went to the same college as you automatically just kind of feel a little more positive towards them, which also means that if you're trying to get a job, you can exploit this fact towards your ends. You can find out something about the person and then highlight that fact as a commonality between the two of you. So if you find out that they grew up in the same place as you can cite the fact that like, yeah, I was back in the old neighborhood last week, and like pass it off casually. They won't realize that you did it intentionally. And they'll be like, oh, you're from the same neighborhood as me. That's kind of cool. We can talk about this. We have a commonality. What are some other ways in which this sort of thing gets exploited?
I would
For
think,
both
like,
good and bad.
I think politics is probably the easiest example, right? Because it promotes division.
Politics is really an excellent case. So in politics, you don't you try to highlight and get people on board by showing like there are many ways in which you can exploit it. So one of them is just the way in which you get people to vote for you by identifying the other group as bad or evil, or just like, we are pulling together as members of this group. Everyone who disagrees with us must be an out group. We must hate them. We must destroy them. So things, real Americans versus foreigners. Like, to be clear, this is quote unquote. When people talk about the real Americans, we are the real Americans. And those immigrants, they are the fake Americans. That's a classic case of, we have defined the in-group. Therefore, we will automatically, once that group is defined, start having a preference towards that group. And then also saying, like, everyone else goes on the outside. Another one tied in with this is when during an election, and so for the presidential election, whenever they're showing like New York, like vote Biden here in New York, who do they have talking about how great Biden is in the commercial? What sorts of people do they interview to say, I'm voting for Biden, you should too? Nicole?
New Yorkers?
Yeah, they have New Yorkers do it. Why? Because you already prefer your fellow New Yorkers. So if you're in Philadelphia, they'll have a bunch of interviews with real Philadelphians. If you're in San Francisco, they'll have interviews with real Bay Area residents. If you have cases of, vote Trump, all real Texans are doing it. Well, if you're from Texas, that's going to speak to you. So these are all cases with in-group preference, out-group dislike. Also, anytime you have a salesperson, like you go to a physical store, remember that before we were on lockdown and actually went to stores instead of just calling up our dear friends at Amazon or enemies at Amazon or people at Amazon? What is it that they would try to do? You're trying to buy a mattress, you're trying to buy a suit. They never just stay silent, they start engaging you in conversation. And once they start engaging you in conversation, do they ever say things like, well, that's dumb, I'm nothing like you? Instead, what they try to, Nicole?
No, I was just gonna say, like, no, they'll try to relate to you.
Yeah, they'll be like, oh, my first car was also a Honda, or, oh, that's funny, I grew up over here, or that's my cousin's neighborhood. Isn't that cool? So what they try to do is try to make you there want to be, to think like, oh, this person is a member of my in-group, Therefore, because they're a member of my in-group, they must be like me. Therefore, I can trust them. I can believe that they're going to give me a good deal. I'm going to get the kind discount or whatnot. Other cases, you can see cases in which this can really, really go awry. Cases in which these extreme out-group dislike and extreme in-group preference can lead to some, terrible, terrible things. So, historically speaking, where's the case in which out-group dislike and in-group preference were exploited for terrible ends? Yeah, the Holocaust is going to be a very clear case. Basically, any time in which any sort of ethnic war, it's built on the sense of, if you are my ethnicity, I prefer you. If you're out there, you're bad. Racism, same way. You define yourself as, we are this group, we are good, I like other people. Out group must be bad. Does anyone have any hypotheses as to why these so these sorts of preferences have been found, like, they're very real things. They've been found in laboratory settings over and over again. Does anyone have any hypotheses as to why we have an in-group effect, preference, and out-group dislike, and why it's so strong? The best ideas behind it come out of basically there was an evolutionary benefit to preferring things that were in your in-group or that you were familiar with. Anyone have any idea as to why there would be this evolutionary benefit? Why it is that people who prefer an in-group in the past were more likely to survive and have more children, thereby allowing more children with those same internal biases to survive, et cetera, et cetera? What's the benefit of this, of an in-group preference? Well, back in the day when we lived in small groups, who was in your in-group? Ilya, did you want to?
Well, I was gonna say the difference between social hierarchies, like the kings and the nobles. Yeah, division on what class they belong to.
Yeah, so back when, Middle Ages, back in ancient times, there were going to be hierarchies, and you were going to be more familiar with those who were of your social class. But the in-group, out-group preference actually predates that. It goes back even farther. It goes back to when we were living in caves. So anyone have any idea as to why having an in-group preference and out-group dislike was likely to have an evolutionary benefit for cavemen?
Because you like with like-minded people.
Yeah. If you lived in a small group of people, who was that small group going to be? Here's a question. Who have you spent the most time with in your life?
Parents?
Your family, your parents. Yeah. Back in the day, your in-group was going to be your family. And we also have a biological tendency to prefer members of our family for genetic reasons. They have genes similar to yours, so there's a social reason to assist them. So it's all the in-group preference and the out-group dislike. Another thing is, if you didn't know a group, they were out there. You could be pretty confident back in caveman periods, your family was going to have your back. Because if you died and there were fewer people in the group, it would be more dangerous for them. So you had a reason to support your family members. And also, because it was a small group that had to work closely together to survive, you had a biological tendency to treat other members of your group with preference. Because if any one of you died, everyone was worse off. Out-groups, though, there was always the potential that an out-group could hurt you. So you never wanted to take, initially you wanted to be wary of that out-group before you knew that they could be trusted. With the family, you knew they could be trusted just because they were biologically similar to you, and also because you all depended on each other to survive. Out-group, you couldn't take that. So we've got this old caveman tendency that is deeply built into our minds that causes us to prefer people who are in our in-group. The issue is these days that can be exploited by salespeople, can be exploited by other members of other people in the society, politicians, things like that. Another way that this comes out in modern society, yeah, there's definitely some Game of Thrones vibes. Another way in which this is manifesting in everyday society is sometimes salespeople will do the reverse. They will try to get you to be a member of the group. So you'll see a bunch of people who are cool or awesome. So you'll see those Peloton riders looking fit and having fun. And you'll be like, well, right now I'm an out-group member, but I want to become an in-group member. I want to buy a Peloton bike so I can now be a member of that cool in-group. So, and not only that, then they will like me because I too have Peloton. So that's a way in which not only is it that people try to sell you things by showing that you are a member of their group, they also try to sell you things by trying to get you to join that group, knowing that you will think, well, those people will like me more. And I want those cool people to like me more. So does everyone understand just this general in-group, out-group sort of thing? We good on this? The next two are going to be related to in-group, out-group a bit. The next one is what are called conformity effects. Does anyone know what conformity is? What is it to conform?
Adhere to a norm.
Yes. Yeah. It's to basically do what everybody else is doing. That's what conformity is. It's basically just the principle behind something like peer pressure, where you do it because everyone else is doing it. And the findings in social psychology around conformity are really incredibly, incredibly strong. So one of the most famous studies, what was called the Asch conformity study. It was by a man named Solomon Asch, whose name I can never remember how to spell. I'm just going to say it's that. There might not be a C. I don't know. Spelling is stupid. And what he basically did is he brought into the lab a bunch of people. You went into the lab and you were told this is a simple study of how good your eyes are. So here's the study. I'm going to show you 4 lines. One of them is going to be a certain length. And then I'm going to ask you which of the other 3 lines is the same length. So here's the first one. Which of these 3 lines is the same length as this line? How many of you can say? Michael.
The far left one.
Yeah, this one. Number 1, 2, 3. Yeah, basically, this is not a hard task. You ask people to do this, and if they just are doing it alone, it's like 95% of the time they're right. Like, people are not bad at seeing. However, what Asch did is he would do it he would have people perform this task in a room with other people. You, the subject, thought that these other people were just random subjects just like you, but really it was 11 collaborators. So 11 basically actors or plants in the room. And these 11 people would go before you and pick one of the other answers. They would say, number 3. Yep, it's number 3. Definitely number 3. Yep, number 3. And when all 11 people picked number 3, you then came up with, you saw 11 people pick 3, and you see a similarity in 1, but what are you going to say out loud? What is your inclination? Well, what do you think the study found?
Most people pick 3.
Yeah, I can never remember the exact numbers, but basically people started picking 3 at a much higher percentage than when there was no one else there. Basically, and if you actually see the videotapes, the people in this room started getting really distressed about the fact that everyone else was picking something different and they didn't want to look like the idiot. So very often they would choose what their eyes were telling them is the wrong line, just because they wanted to fit in. And you can see cases of this over and over again in our everyday lives, where people will do things simply for the purpose of fitting in. And because there's that strong feeling that you don't want to be the one standing out and different. So what are some cases you can come up with from your everyday lives in which you've seen this sort of thing happen? It can be from a fictional story, it can be personal, it can be anything.
How about when you're in class and the teacher asks a question and the right answer, but then somebody else says something else, and then you try to like go with the other person's ideas?
Absolutely, that's a really good one where you change your answer to fit in with someone else, or even something where like, I would be willing to bet when I ask these questions here in class, that many of you know the answers, but just don't want to say them because you don't want to be the one person who's speaking first. Or you assume that maybe all my classmates know, and I don't want to be the one idiot who says the wrong answer. What are some other cases in which conformity comes up? Well, why is it that very often a large group of people starts doing things that people wouldn't? So one thing, following traffic, yeah, you can just, you don't want to be the person who's going a different way, even if you know that the route someone's taking might be longer or more complicated, you just follow along with other people. Another thing is, look at the Capitol riots, the Capitol riot that happened in January. Why were so many people willing to riot and break into the Capitol? What was it about the fact that there were so many people that mattered? If you were to take any one of the people who broke into the Capitol and put them by themselves in front of the Capitol, how many of them do you think would have tried to break in? As many as, like, instead of rushing as a mob, they rushed the Capitol steps one at a time. What would have actually happened? Would they have been as likely to rush, or would they not have been as likely to rush?
Probably not likely.
Yeah, they're not as likely. And this is a classic thing in riots and things like this. Why is it that why is it that sports fans start doing crazy things? Well, as soon as one person does something or a handful of people do something, there's this social pressure not to be the one who isn't doing it. Same thing with like classic peer pressure cases. You don't want to be the one person left out. Anyone know why we would have this sort of, or actually let's talk, how would this come up in a manipulative setting? How would somebody use this tendency to get you to conform to what others are doing, to get you to do something which might not be in your best interest and might not be something you believe in?
Probably like a pyramid scheme.
So a pyramid scheme is a classic case in which you are told like everybody is buying in on this, or you find another group of people and try to, if all your neighbors are buying something, then you're going to try to buy that thing too. You don't want to be the one person who doesn't have it. So very often what a company will try to do is get a large number of people doing something so you don't feel left out. So if everyone else of your friends already has a certain type of hat that costs $10,000, now you need to have one of those too. You don't want to stand out. If everyone you know has Gucci bags, then you're going to have to spend your last cent on a Gucci bag because, or a Coach bag. Sorry, I'm confusing my fancy things. Somebody else buys a Coach bag, you have to spend your last cent to fit in, as you don't want to be the one person without a Coach bag. So very often, in a commercial, what will the commercial say? What will it, they're selling cereal. What will Wheaties say? What will Cheerios say? They'll say something like, Cheerios, the #1 cereal amongst Americans. Or Ford, the best-selling car in America. PS5 and Xbox, this is another one. You try to get people to immediately, you show everybody else having one, go and buy one yourself. So demand goes up really high. you know, the difference between a PS5 and a PS4, initially, if anything, there's fewer games for them, but you don't want to be the one left out when all your friends get the new thing. This is how even things like, why is it that Apple is able to sell a new iPhone every single year for, even though like I can tell you as somebody with an older one, the old iPhone works great. Well, you don't want to be left out. You want to conform to what everyone else is doing. As soon as all your friends have something, it's much harder. This is also why if you ever are around a group of like people between age 10 and 16 and look down at their feet, there's probably just one type of shoe that all of them are wearing, because nobody wants to be the one who doesn't have that shoe. Where are some other ways in which conformity comes in?
Well, I saw this study, and I don't know if this is exactly conformity, but it had to do with like helping like if you see someone get hurt in a group of people, you're a lot less likely to go and help them if no one else does. Whereas if you were the only bystander to see this act, you would be more willing to help. But because no one's acting on it, neither do you.
So this is, I can never remember the name. I'm going to include this one because this is another famous social psychological principle. I think it's the dispersion. So let's put this over here. Dispersing of responsibility. So part of this is a conformity thing of, or bystander effect is tied in with this. So bystander effect. So there actually, in these cases, there are a couple different things going on. So in the classic case, you see someone get injured and there's 40 people around. The person is far less likely to get help than if there's just one person around. Part of that is the bystander effect, which is that if you see everyone else around, you assume, well, somebody else will help them, I don't need to. And therefore, if everyone's doing that, nobody ends up helping. But on the flip side, part of the reason why people don't want to assist someone is because they don't want to be the one person who went over and helped them when they didn't really need help. Like if you see someone fall and they're embarrassed about it and you're like, hey, do you need help? You don't want to be the one person who wasn't paying close attention and help someone who doesn't want it. You don't want to be the one person who stands out. So that these sorts of cases of bystander effects involve this sort of feeling of it's not my responsibility, but they also definitely involve this sort of conformity. Also, many cases of war crimes involve a conformity. If you just have a couple people who shoot a prisoner, then that's really all you need. As soon as that happens, no one else wants to feel like they're outside their war unit or their like platoon. And so very quickly, things can spiral into extreme violence just by starting off with a little violence. You don't want to be the person who didn't beat this person up. You don't want to be the person who didn't shoot someone. Instead, you don't want to be the person who asks your boss, like, boss, are we sure this is a good idea? You just stay silent. You don't want to be the squeaky wheel. There's this social pressure not to. So in cases of advertisements, you see cases in which they try to say everybody's doing it, and so there's this pressure to conform. Anyone know what the evolutionary basis for conformity would be? I'll give you a clue. It goes back to caveman times as well. Anyone have any ideas? All right, so
Isn't it survival?
say that again.
Survival?
Yeah, it's again going to be survival. Why? Well, imagine this. Well, first off, look at your hands and then feel your teeth in your mouth. Do you have giant claws that can kill anything? No, you don't. I mean, you might. One of you might be Wolverine, and I don't know it, but I'd be willing to bet you probably aren't. You also, like, compare your teeth to, like, a lion. The lion has much bigger teeth. It's much stronger. Why is it, though, that the cities of the world are made by human beings instead of by lions and sharks and other things? What do we have that they don't have? What is it that we do that they can't do? Give you a clue, I'm doing it right now.
Talk.
Yeah, they can talk, they can organize into groups. So an individual human is pretty weak and pathetic. a group of humans is strong and is able to essentially take over the world to the point of destroying it because we have so much power over the world. So the number one thing that you could not afford to do back when a small group of people was get kicked out of it to live alone in the wilderness, because you would very quickly get eaten. So in this sort of situation, conforming to the group so you wouldn't be treated as an out-group member and kicked out was much more important. So even if you knew the right answer was different from what everyone else said, it was evolutionarily better for you to go with the group towards the less than ideal answer than to strike off on your own with the ideal one. And so that's why we have this tendency towards conformity. This is why we have it on things as strong as, like, if everyone's walking on the right side, walking on the left makes you feel like an ass. This is why it's so hard to break social norms. Why, like, you can, like, somebody who doesn't, a tourist does something that, like, we don't really do in New York. Like that, you feel kind of like, and why so many of us aren't willing to break these sorts of things. Why? Well, because we have this deep-seated need to conform. All right, the last group conformity type one is what the book calls social proof. This has some overlaps here with conformity. A lot of the same cases. So yeah, Dale says science was based on challenging social norms. And what we find is that very often, why did it take so long for science to occur? And why was it that it took someone like a Galileo to go, you know what, I'm going to say 2 middle fingers up to the church and I'm going to publish the truth? Well, many people were not willing to do that. So what Dale's pointing to is science was based on challenging social norms. And in a lot of cases, what we find is that it's extraordinarily, hard-skinned people who are willing to do something to challenge the social norms, which will lead to breakthroughs. And very often it's so hard to have these sorts of breakthroughs because nobody wanted to be the squeaky wheel. So it took a time like, part of the reason why science was able to build in the Renaissance when it did is because up until that, like, it's not like people suddenly became smarter in the year 1300. Rather, it was that the social world had shifted in such a degree that being an individual was mattered more and you were respected for it. Before that time, you would be punished in a society in which there were those strong social divisions. I think it was it Elio who brought this up before? That back in medieval times, there were strong class systems. And if you went against that, all the pressure was to slam that down. And it wasn't until there was this rediscovering of classical culture and individuality where people were starting to go, maybe we can break these social norms. Maybe there was almost suddenly a norm allowing for norm breaking, or there was some element in which people were willing to do it. So a lot of the breakthroughs, what we find are people who are able to go against these sorts of tendencies in a modern world, because these days, going against, like back in the day, going against the group would have gotten you killed. Nowadays, it can be very beneficial. However, you have to kind of overcome your internal tendencies to do that. You have to be the person who's going to go, everyone thinks I'm dumb, but I'm going to try it anyway. Back in the day, you would have been killed. Now you can get away with that and make genuine progress for yourself, for your family, for your society. Social proof. So that's a great point, Dale. Social proof. Social proof is basically just relying on a group to prove that something's true. So as a matter of fact, we can't know everything. We have limited brain power, limited times of day. And so very often we have to look to other people to find out whether something's true or not. So if you are somebody who's interested in going to a new restaurant, you've never been to it before, how do you go about finding if it's any good?
Google or Yelp?
Yeah, Google or Yelp. Why does that work? Why do you go to Google or Yelp?
Because you get a vast reviews from different people depending on their likes.
Yeah, generally why? Like if a restaurant has 4.9 stars with 5,000 reviews, it's probably good. Why? Because a lot of different people believe it's good. So therefore, it probably is good. it probably is true that if a lot of people believe something to be true, it probably is. Think about like if you were blind and you didn't know what color the sky was, you could just ask a bunch of not blind people, and if all of them said, well, it's blue when there's no clouds and it's gray when there are clouds and it's black at night, then you can be pretty confident if everyone says that, that's the truth. So social proof is just the practice of using large, like basically you ask a lot of people what's true, and if most people give you the same answer, then it can be a, you're generally tending to agree with what everyone else is saying. So this is conformity, not because it's a benefit to be a member of the group, but just because the group is probably right, because a lot of people feel the same way. However, this can be exploited. So how is social proof sometimes exploited? So are there, so you know how there are these scam websites that say, you know, we sell shirts, and then you give them their credit card number and they steal all your information. These sorts of websites. Everyone know what I'm talking about in terms of, you know, any sort of fraud on the internet. Yeah, it can be hackers, but there are literally things in just a straightforward way. There are websites that will pretend to be a real vendor, and then when you try to buy the thing, you will not be given anything and they'll just steal your credit card information. Now, if you go to the reviews of these websites, they are generally 3-star-ish. Why are they 3 stars instead of 1 star? Why is it that they aren't just entirely messages that say, don't use this website? Yeah, fake reviews. Fake reviews are a way in which you, basically, you can just get a lot of bots to say something's the case. This is why you have things like, why is it that fake news is able to spread across the internet? Why is it that conspiracy theories are able to spread on the internet so fast? Well, you make a ton of fake accounts, all of them say the earth is flat, and then all of a sudden, well, 70 million people say the earth is flat, well, the earth must be flat. When really it's just one person with a computer who just makes a bunch of fake accounts. So if you can convince someone that a lot of people believe something, you can convince people to do something or believe something's true, even if it isn't, just because they believe that a lot of people think it's true. So that makes sense to people, how you could convince people to believe something simply because lots of people believe it, when really the fact that they believe it in this case, it can be fake, it can be convinced. So this is another way in which those commercials that say the #1 most popular razor in America. Well, if it's the #1 popular razor in America, that must mean it's good, because why would so many people use it if it sucked? So that sort of thing. Or why is it that, you know, something like a new movie will say, we have this many critics and audiences alike are raving about our new movie, even though it is a terrible movie that nobody actually likes. Well, they say it anyway to try to convince you, if everyone likes it, it must be pretty good. Where are some other ways in which social proof can lead people astray? Well, another thing is, just because a large number of people believe it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And what this allows for is, if there's some other explanation for people believing something, then the fact that many people believe it ends up being kind of like a circle that you can't break out of. So why is it so hard to convince racist people that people of other races are just as good at everything as their own race? Because they have allies, because they're going to look around them and say, you might tell me that people of color are just as X, Y, and Z, but everyone around me doesn't believe it. So that's the proof I have. So this is also why these enclosed sort of echo chambers on the internet, if everyone you're interacting with on the internet believes that something's the case, what can end up happening is that you end up believing it more strongly. So another thing, yeah, cultural pride in the same sort of way. You start to So part of that is the conformity. Part of that is the in-group, but another part of it is like the social proof. Another thing, Instagram influence, a classic case in which somebody is able to get many other people to believe something just because a lot of people see this influencer. It's like, well, this influencer, they like it, all their followers like it, I should like it too. It must be good. These are all cases in which we use just the sheer fact that lots of people say something or believe something convinces us it's the case. And what can end up happening is one person this is how QAnon got off the ground, is one person said, one person, Q, posted on a 4chan message board that the Democrats run a child pornography, child trafficking ring out of a basement. And then once one person said it, more people on the internet started believing it. And then you'd have people like, well, I heard from 77 different people that QAnon is real, therefore it's probably real. So this is the way in which these conspiracy theories start. If one person says it, the influencer then tells some more people who then influence more, and all of a sudden everybody believes something, even though originally it was just one person doing something as a joke. This can happen on the internet where somebody decides it'd be funny to say a celebrity died, or I guess a few weeks ago it said J-Lo and Alex Rodriguez broke up. Suddenly it grew and it was everywhere, and then they had to come out and say, no, we didn't break up. Since then, they may have broken up. I don't follow such things closely enough. Any questions on social proof?
No, it's pretty clear.
Okay. The last one I want to talk about is compliance. What is it to comply with someone or something?
To accept or go with?
Yeah, go with, give in. And so specifically compliance with authority. And what we find with human beings is we generally are willing to go along with what an authority figure tells us to do. Does anyone know this might be the most famous psych experiment ever. It's definitely the most famous social psych experiment. Does anyone know what who the person was or what the name of the experiments were that really first demonstrated how strong the human compliance with authority is? So Stanford Prison Experiment is it was more or less the follow-up of the first one. It's closely related, the Stanford Prison Experiment. And that had some elements of it, but that also, the Stanford Prison Experiment also kind of demonstrated that had some conformity things of you didn't want to be the only guard who didn't beat the prisoners. So what was the one that was looking more at the so Joseph, you are mostly right, but I'm being pedantic and therefore not going to give it to you. Does anyone know what the other one, the other famous social psych experiment studying compliance with authority was? I'm trying to judge this just to see how much detail I have to give in describing it. All right. Milgram. Have people heard of the Milgram studies?
Was that the like
The
school
prison
experiment?
experiment?
Wait, say Michael first and then Nicole.
Oh, sorry. Is that the school experiment?
So it's kind of like a school experiment. There is a teaching element, Nicole.
I thought it was, oh wait, no, I was thinking of the prison experiment. Like
Yeah, so I'm gonna, because multiple people have brought up the prison experiment, I'm gonna explain that one after I do this one. What I'll probably do is, I'll just talk about Milgram, describe it in depth, and then jump over to the prison, which showed some other very interesting social psychology elements. But the Milgram study went something like, I'll just describe the study. You're walking around the city of New Haven, Connecticut, which is where Yale is, and you see a flyer that says, we're currently looking to find volunteers, complete volunteer thing to study the nature of learning. And so you go, oh yeah, sure, I'll sign up for this. I'm willing to volunteer for this. And you weren't getting paid money or anything. You just agreed to be a part of this Yale study. And when you got there, they sat you down in a room and said, look, we've done a lot of experiments on learning and the effects of reward and punishment on learning in animals, but we haven't done as much on human beings. So what you're going to do in this experiment is you are going to either be a learner or a teacher. So it's you sit in there with one other person. One of you is going to be the learner and one of you is going to be the teacher. And what we're going to do is test the effects of punishment on how well someone learns a random string of numbers. So we give you a number, you have to memorize it and then repeat it aloud when asked. If you get it right, you move on to the next one. If you get it wrong, you will be administered an electric shock. Here, you can feel what the first shock feels like. This is only 15 volts, so you put your hand under it, goes, and you feel like a mild discomfort. So that's how the experiment started. And they go, all right, we're going to randomly choose who's going to be the teacher, who's going to be the learner. Inevitably, they point to you and go, okay, you're the teacher. You then go and sit down. The learner goes into a room on the other side of an opaque wall, so you can't give them any hints. And you start giving them questions. And every time they get one right, you move on to the next question. And every time they get one wrong, you shock them and then move the shock thing up one more level. So yeah, Sean, this is a famous experiment, so you might have seen it before. So 15, 45. I can't remember what the exact numbers were, but just imagine blah, 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 then caution, danger. So imagine there's a button here, a bunch along here, caution, danger. This is what your little shock board looked like. It showed the numbers, and then once you got down very far, the numbers got in bright red letters and said things like caution, danger, and could kill, and XXX. You now start this, and inevitably this person starts getting things wrong. They get it wrong, you give them 15, 45. By about halfway through them getting it wrong, you start hearing shouts of pain from the other room. By about 2/3 of the way through, you hear someone screaming, oh my God, please stop, this is really hurting. By about here, they just start pounding on the table and screaming. By the end, they've gone completely silent. If you pause at any moment in the study, there was a person in a lab coat standing next to you who would just say, I'm sorry, but the experiment must continue. Or you agreed to do this, we really need your data. Or the experiment must go on. Please can proceed. So that's the layout of the experiment. Here's the real question. How many people do you think went all the way? What percentage of normal American volunteers weren't getting money, weren't doing this for credit, agreed to give all of the shocks such to the point that the person on the other side had gone silent after screaming for a while? What percentage of people do you think went all the way in this teaching experiment?
0.
So Giacomo's guess is what most people said. Most of the psychologists, before they took the study, before the study was done, they asked experts, and most guessed maximum 1% would go all the way. What was the actual answer? 65% of people went all the way. So Juan's not quite right, but he's pretty damn close with 80. So what that means is there's currently 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. It looks like there's 17 people here. That means of those 17, let's just say it was 18, 12 of us would have gone simply by somebody standing there next to us in a lab coat telling us this must continue. 12 of the 18 of us right now would have continued administering shocks to people, even though we thought we had killed them. 65, that means if you're in a room with 100 people, 65 of them would have continued administering shocks, not because they were going to get punished, but simply because someone in a white lab coat told them to. Now, of course, there was no actual death happening. The person on the other side of the wall was a Confederate who was like, they were an actor, paid actor, pretending to be shocked. So nobody was actually harmed. But the person the subject was actually an ordinary person, and 65% of them were willing to go all the way. So what does this show about the way the human mind works? Well, what it shows is that in the right circumstances, if an authority figure tells us to do something, we're willing to do just about anything simply because that person is an authority figure. Those of us who like to think we're good people, most of us good people would be willing to murder somebody for no good reason, simply because we were in a setting in which an authority figure was informing us, you must continue with this. And this is one of, why is it the case that most people are willing to do this? What is it about an authority figure telling you that makes us inclined to do things that are really quite monstrous? What is it about the fact that it's an authority figure that matters? Anyone know?
You might get in trouble.
So part of it is that you might get in trouble, but even if it's not, so that's definitely part of it, is this person is sternly telling you not to. But even if you know, like the people who went in were like, they weren't doing it for money, they knew they couldn't get arrested. What's the other reason to think that, like, why else would you keep doing it? Well, when a soldier commits when a soldier commits a war crime, what is very often their explanation for doing it? So part of this, Dale says, conditioned from our childhood to respect authority. That's definitely a part of it. We are in some ways told to respect authority. Communist countries, I don't know if they've done studies of what types of countries and what the cultural differences are in terms of respecting authority. But there's definitely a case to be made that even in a communist society or a society in which you're brought up to follow the dictates of any sort of dictatorial power, maybe you're even more likely to do it. But I mean, in the United States, we are to some degree told to respect authorities, but we're also told to think for ourselves and not murder people. So it's not just the element of like, you don't want to disrespect the authority. Well, if you do something bad, so here's the case. Imagine that I gave you all the following homework assignment. Your homework assignment is to go outside and kick a puppy. That's your homework assignment. Now imagine you actually did that, but were caught doing it by the cops. What would your explanation be for why you kicked this puppy?
I would say
My professor told me to.
Yeah. For homework.
Yeah, my professor told me to. So one of the things that what we
Markin's classroom professor. What's up?
So what we say in these sorts of cases is you point to the authority figure and say, well, they're the one who did it. So there's this, what's often called this dispersion of responsibility, or this ability to say the person higher up the chain of command did it. So if a worker at a company does something bad, they say, well, my boss told me to. And if the boss did something bad, they say, my boss told me to, and et cetera, all the way up to the top. So what you often find in cases in which these sorts of things happen is that the authority figure, you're able to convince yourself, I didn't do anything wrong. I was just following orders. I was just following commands. I didn't do a bad thing. All I did was what I was told to do. I'm not a bad person. And if everybody does that, then you only need one person at the top to give the order. And the person at the top will then say something like, well, I didn't tell them to do this. I just said, make sure it gets done. So this is the way in which you end up with people doing some terrible, terrible things down at the bottom, perfectly ordinary people. And these ordinary people will do bad things simply because an authority figure told them to. Now, in advertising, this comes out in which you have very often a celebrity endorser, or somebody in a position of power. And this is part of the reason that the appeal to authority fallacy happens so often is because we listen to authority figures. But there's a thing to keep in mind, which is just because someone's an authority figure and they're telling you to do something, like the human tendency is to do what they tell you to do. But it's important to keep in mind, like you are an ordinary person. You are an ordinary person who, just like every other ordinary person, you could be, in fact, statistically speaking, if you aren't aware of this sort of thing, you are probably in the 65%. So the thing with the Milgram experiment is that it really kind of brings out this kind of horror of you, like human beings, our social tendencies can be led astray. And if we aren't careful, we ordinary people, like the average person is not evil in some like they could be the Dark Lord sense. They're just an ordinary person with a psychology. And because of this, you have to be aware of fighting against these sorts of tendencies. And this is going to bring, I'm going to finish off by talking about the Stanford Prison Experiment, which is another one of these things. So does anyone have any questions first off before I go on to the prison experiment about what compliance with authority is, what social proof is, what conformity, so compliance with authority, conformity, in-group, out-group, and halo effect, because those are the 5 ones that I mostly want you to work on or remember, because on the homework assignment for this week, it's literally go online, find 4 different advertisements. Each one of them is some type of effect like this, trying to convince you to do something. And you just have to like write out a little paragraph of what it is. It'll be straightforward. I'll be grading it easily. Don't stress over it. I just want to make sure that everyone knows what it is. We doing all right? All right. So if you want to get going, class is officially over. If you want to hear about the Stanford Prison Experiment, pause for stick around for a minute. I'll describe the Stanford Prison Experiment. All right. So the way the Stanford Prison Experiment worked was as follows. It was, again, a volunteer sort of thing. In this case, you as a subject were told, we are going to be simulating a prison here on the Stanford campus. You will be randomly assigned either as a prison guard or as a prisoner. And you will then be like kept in this like enclosed space. And for 2 weeks, we're just going to act out this prison. And you are going to be paid handsomely. It ended up being something that like today would have been well above minimum wage for 2 weeks work. You are going to be paid pretty good money. So if you were selected as, they tried to make it as authentic as possible. So if you were selected as a prisoner, the Palo Alto police were asked to pull up to your house, arrest you, bring you to the police station, handcuff you, all the normal stuff. But then instead of bringing you to a jail, they brought you to this fake prison experiment site. If you were assigned to be a guard, you were given a stick, you were given the uniform, you were given a 8-hour shifts, and you show up for your 8-hour shifts. And at any time, with something like 9 prisoners and 3 guards would be on duty. Does anyone know what ended up happening? So the plan was for this experiment, these were ordinary people, just totally, if they showed any signs of being sadistic or any signs of anything, they were not selected for the experiment. These were all upstanding citizens in the community, totally normal people. The experiment was supposed to go for 14 days. It was stopped after 6. Does anyone have any ideas as to why it was stopped after 6 days? Those of you who have heard of it or otherwise.
Cruel and unusual punishment?
Yeah, basically, these were ordinary folk. These were, to be clear, no one committed any crimes. Nobody actually did anything wrong. No one was actually in prison to be because they deserved it. And yet, nonetheless, after 6 days, it was stopped because the guards started beating the prisoners as if they had actually committed crimes. They were putting them in solitary confinement for hours in ways that were basically were more or less torture. These people were having nervous breakdowns. The prisoners started ratting on each other. They started just basically dehumanizing themselves for every little reward. One person would lie and say something, this person, they've been lying and they've been trying to plan how to escape. I'm telling you this, could you just give me an extra blanket? I'm a little cold at night. This was all happening within 6 days, and these were not actual prisoners or actual guards. It was rather that something about the environment in which all the prisoners were called just by a number. They had to refer to the guards exclusively as yes, sir, no, sir. Yes, officer so-and-so. And within 6 days, these perfectly ordinary people were beating each other up to the point that the experiment had to be ended. Dale, did you have something you wanted to say? I just saw the microphone. No worries if you didn't. I just didn't want to cut you off. So this is what the Stanford Prison Experiment was. And the main takeaway of the Stanford Prison Experiment is it's not just authority that we comply with. It's also our imaginations of how power works. So if you are a person in a position of power, you start to act as if you've earned this power and that the other people below you deserve the punishment. Mary, did you have a question?
No, sorry.
Oh, no worries. So you start to conform to these social roles and these expectations. It's also the power of dehumanizing. Another thing they found in social psychology is the quickest way to get somebody to treat another person poorly is to get them to think that other person isn't actually a person. So if you don't think of them as John with a family and kids, but just think of them as prisoner 24601, you are going to be willing to do things to them that dehumanize them. And very often what you'll do is you'll convince yourself that they must have done something bad. If I'm beating this person, they must have done something bad because I'm not a bad guy. I'm just an ordinary dude. So if he got beaten by me, he must have deserved it. And so what we ended up with in the prison experiment was a case in which ordinary folks, it would have been the same as if I just taken like this class and assigned you all. That's what they found with the prison experiment. People just started literally beating each other. And what you start to find is these sorts of experiments are the sorts of things like that make a lot more sense of things like police brutality and things like that. It's when you learn more about the social psychology in a case, like, is it that surprising that we see people who are cops taking liberties with their positions when on top of it, like if ordinary people are doing this to people who they know didn't commit crimes, is it really all that surprising that we're seeing people in positions of power occasionally doing things that they shouldn't, and why ordinary folks will do terrible things? I want to actually finish with one final thing to just this, I think, in some ways, kind of hammers home the word, like this photo in some ways really hammers home in a photo form really the key idea here of just people in positions of, you know, for this, because you've defined yourself as a member of a certain group, or where is this? Open. Why won't you open? The photo is just like ordinary people will do terrible things when put in the right circumstances. And it's because we have these social psychological tendencies. So where is this one? Here's one. All right. Everyone see this photo? Can you see this photo? I couldn't get it up on the other computer, but everyone see this? These ordinary, perfectly ordinary looking women eating blueberries, listening to music. This sort of photo could be taken of any of us on a nice day out in the city. Does anyone know who these women actually are? Anyone have any guesses where this photo was taken and who these women were? These happy, ordinary looking women, these were the women who worked at Auschwitz, as in the death camp run by Nazi Germany to eradicate large numbers of Jewish people. These were people who worked there on the books, ordinary people who, you know, these are in no way like, they don't all have evil mustaches. These are just ordinary folks where if you put them, if they have to think, well, I have to have this job to feed my family, I can't afford to lose it. And my boss told me to, so it's not really me who's pulling the trigger, it's someone further up the line. And I like my coworkers and I don't want to let them down. And I don't want to be the squeaky wheel who stands out. Well, this is how we end up with, it's not that there were, 7 million or 20 million Hitlers in Germany in World War II. It was one Hitler, some other people who were just as strongly viewed as he was, and millions of ordinary folks being channeled through these social psychological pressures. So that's really, that's where I wanted to stop. For the assignment, just feel free to reach out if you have any more questions. I'm going to post this lecture as soon as it finishes processing, and I will see everyone next Monday. Have a good rest of your week and enjoy the nice weather.